Welcome to a place where forests whispered secrets, houses were made of candy, and danger wore a velvet cloak, an era when witches offered apples, wolves were masters of rhetoric, and love always seemed to have enough hair to be used as a ladder. This is the story of humanity's favorite hope mechanisms, the tales that taught us to be afraid and still walk the path. Everything seems charmingly innocent, until someone realizes grandma's cake tastes a lot like a moral lesson. If you enjoy stories where kindness wins slowly, fate has a sense of humor, and every happy ending comes with a slight scratch of reality. Like the video and subscribe for more quietly magical bedtime tales. This episode is part of our classic Grimm Tales collection, a cozy series of bedtime stories that revisits the fables that shaped our imagination and warmed generations, now retold in a calm, human, and irresistibly nostalgic tone. Tell us in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. There's something strangely comforting about falling asleep to stories of courage, kindness, and fresh bread baking in the middle of the forest. Now, turn off the lights, fluff your pillow, and get ready to step into a world where fears were simple, hopes were sincere, and every tale began the way every good night should. Hansel and Gretel. The village woke up slowly, the way only small places know how, with more yawns than noise. There was no luxury, but there was that smell of bread rising from the chimneys that made your stomach believe everything would be okay, even when life said otherwise. Hansel and Gretel knew every stone on the dirt path, every crooked fence, every neighbor who complained about the same thing every day. Their house was simple, but it held a kind of warmth that didn't come from the furniture, but from the way the two of them looked at each other, as if saying, "I've got you, even when the world's a bit off." Poverty wasn't just the lack of food. It was a silence that weighed in the corners of the table. But even so, they had this lovely habit of turning every crumb into hope. And maybe that's why on that cold morning, even with frost biting their fingers and their stomachs growling, there was a strange feeling in the air, as if something was about to change. And honestly, sometimes, just before adventure arrives, the universe gives you that sly little smile. Poverty wasn't new in that house, but lately, it felt like it had taken root in the drawers. The father tried to hide his worry with a crooked smile, the kind that only fools those who want to be fooled. The stepmother, tired of doing math that never added up, spoke less and sighed more. When your belly complains every day, even the sound of a spoon on a plate becomes a memory. Hansel was the type who wanted to fix everything with wild ideas, and Gretel was the one who brought him back down to earth. They were different, but fit together just right, like bread and butter when there was any. And even in scarcity, they still knew how to laugh at silly things, because laughing is a cheap way to survive. Their father told old forest stories to distract them, but sometimes it seemed like even he only half believed them. The forest was serious business in the village, beautiful by day, mysterious by night, full of secrets at any hour. The trees spread out like they wanted to hug everything, and the ground was always covered in soft moss. It smelled of pine, dampness, and watch your step. But there was also something magical, a silent peace that contrasted with the village's chaos. Hansel and Gretel, even afraid, felt that inside the forest there was something different, maybe freedom, maybe danger, maybe both. He, always observing, knew the forest isn't good or bad, it just reveals who you are. And soon, they would have to learn that in the deepest way possible. When their father suggested that walk in the woods, the words came with such rehearsed calm that they already gave away the lie. Hansel noticed it immediately, because kids can smell goodbyes before they even happen. Gretel didn't ask anything, just squeezed her brother's hand like she was saying, "If it goes wrong, I stay." They followed their father through paths they knew more by ear than by foot, and the ground was damp, slippery, smelling of living earth. The wind moved through the trees like it was whispering the secrets of someone who had seen many stories repeat themselves. Even with fear creeping in, there was a strange beauty there, light filtered through the leaves, birds scribbling across the sky, moss that felt like carpet. It was as if the forest was both comfort and warning at the same time. When their father stopped and said, "Wait here," the world seemed to hold its breath. He walked away with steps far too light for someone who promised to return. Silence. A deep silence. The kind that makes your chest ache. Hansel tried to be brave and said, "He'll be right back," but the words came out quiet, almost begging. Gretel leaned against a tree and chose to believe him, even though she knew. It's funny how, in the worst moments, support doesn't always fix things, but it keeps you from falling apart. And in that instant, alone in the heart of the forest, they understood. Adventure doesn't begin with courage. It begins with abandonment. The first steps without their father felt heavier than any long walk, because now it wasn't just their bodies moving, it was their souls trying not to fall apart. The forest, which once seemed beautiful, now held a different silence, almost too alert. Even so, they pressed on because standing still hurts more than moving forward without knowing where you're going. Hansel took the lead, trying to look confident, while Gretel watched every detail, as if nature itself might offer clues. The ground was cold but soft. The air smelled of wet leaves and carried a breeze that reminded them the world was still turning. Every now and then a little bird sang as if saying, "Relax, you're not alone." They started talking about anything, childhood, silly dreams, food, just to drown out the sound of fear thinking out loud. It's strange, but sometimes courage is born from the most random conversations. Hansel said one day he'd build a house nearby, filled with bread and laughter. Gretel answered she'd plant a huge garden with flowers that never wilt, because in her mind, some things should be eternal. They laughed, and that laugh was worth more than any map, because deep down, hope is also survival. And as the sun shifted positions and the shadows grew slowly, they discovered something important. No one faces the forest alone, even when it's just you and the one holding your hand. That's when, in the middle of all those trees, something different appeared. First as a smell, then as a dream. A sweet aroma began dancing through the air, so out of place it felt like a joke. Sugar, cinnamon, cake, fresh from the oven. Gretel stopped, looked at Hansel, and they both thought the same thing. Either we're hallucinating or paradise has an address. They followed the scent like someone follows music, and suddenly the forest opened up into a soft clearing. And there it was, a little house that looked like it had come straight out of a very creative and hungry child's imagination. Walls that looked like glazed sugar, a caramel-colored roof, windows gleaming like jam in the sunlight. There were even little candies lined along the edges, like someone had decorated it with patience and absolutely zero restraint. It was so absurd and so perfect that they stood there for a few seconds just staring, trying to figure out if it was real or a trick. Hansel laughed. "If this is a hallucination, at least it's a delicious one." Gretel stepped forward and said, "If it's a trap, it's the politest trap I've ever seen." But there was something in that warm light coming from the window, something that whispered, "Come in, rest, I'll take care of you." And when life breaks you from the inside, any sign of care becomes almost irresistible. So they took a deep breath, forgot logic, and let themselves be guided by the hope that smelled like sugar. Because, let's be honest, who could resist a house that feels like a hug? They knocked on the door with a mix of politeness and hunger, and soon a soft voice answered from inside, like someone who had been expecting visitors all along. The woman appeared smiling, wearing a friendly apron and with the air of a fairy tale grandma. the kind who knows exactly when to serve tea. She invited them in slowly, with that kind of hospitality that almost makes you forget the world can be cruel. The table was set like a feast: warm bread, fluffy cake, steaming soup, and not a hint of stinginess in sight. Hansel looked suspicious, Gretel looked enchanted, and they both ate like life was being poured back into their bodies. The woman spoke gently, like someone who stitches words with care, and asked very little, which is rare and suspicious in adults. The whole house smelled like comfort, sweetness, warm wood, and a soft touch of spice. The walls were painted in cozy colors, the fireplace crackled like happy fire, and even the chairs seemed to hug you. For a few minutes, it felt like there was nothing bad in the world, but there was something subtle, a glance that lingered half a second too long, a silence that wasn't quite silence, as if the kindness was real, but came with rules. And Hansel and Gretel, even gratefully, realized sometimes danger comes wrapped in care, which is why keeping your eyes open is just as important as filling your belly. Over time, the candy-coated house began to show a less sugary side. Nothing obvious, just odd. The woman was kind, but watched everything too closely, like someone counting the crumbs on the floor. She asked for little favors: clean this, help there, sweep over there. Nothing much, but always just a little more. Hansel noticed their freedom had shrunk, and no one had even said you can't go out. Gretel noticed the doors were never really locked, but they were always heavy. It was like living in a hug that squeezed a little more every day. They still ate well, slept warm, received smiles, but the smiles never quite reached her eyes. And there's one thing about clever children: they know when something feels off, even without proof. So they started trading glances, creating secret signals, observing patterns. They turned the house into a puzzle and began testing the pieces. Hansel made up innocent questions just to see how she reacted. Gretel pretended to be distracted while memorizing every corner. And the more they understood the house, the more they realized it was sweet on the outside, calculated on the inside. The woman thought she had two helpless little guests, but what she really had were two miniature strategists quietly planning a final checkout. They didn't come up with some wild movie-style plan. They made a possible plan, the kind clever kids make when they pay attention to what adults think no one notices. They realized the woman always got more distracted when she lit the big oven at the back of the house, because she was proud of that oven, like it was her throne. Hansel, pretending innocent curiosity, began chatting her up during those moments, asking questions, complimenting the pastries, pretending he wanted to learn. Meanwhile, Gretel slipped through the rooms, tested doors, watched windows, memorized every escape step like someone choreographing freedom. They discovered that one of the pantry windows didn't close quite right. It lifted slowly, but it lifted. So they waited for the right day, the woman distracted by the oven, the strong smell of sugar in the air, the roar of the fire masking any sound. Hansel called her over. "Come see if the dough's good." And she, proud and pleased, walked over with a smile. At that exact moment, Gretel ran to the pantry, carefully opened the window, and signaled to her brother. Hansel gave one last fake smile, like someone thanking their host, and bolted. They both slipped through the window, landed in the grass outside, and ran like the ground was on fire. They didn't look back, because those who truly escape learn that the best response to the past is speed. And as the candy-coated house disappeared among the trees, they felt the rarest thing in the world, fear and relief walking hand in hand toward freedom. The forest, once frightening, now felt almost welcoming. Because let's be honest, everything feels safe after you escape a house that smiles sweetly but locks you inside. The ground was still damp, the trees still tall, but the air felt lighter, as if the forest had seen them flee and whispered, "Good job, kids." They weren't sure how to get back, but for the first time, they didn't feel lost. They felt in charge of their own steps. Hansel said he remembered a frog-shaped rock. Gretel remembered a fallen log shaped like a bridge. In the end, they followed instinct more than logic, and instinct, when paired with courage, usually knows the way. As they walked, they talked about what they'd do once home. Eat real bread, sleep without fear, maybe even plant a tree just to say we made it. And how beautiful is this? Even tired, there was still room for dreams. The sun slowly sank, painting the forest gold, and each step felt lighter than the last, until suddenly, a familiar sound, the crackle of firewood on the stove, then the smell of simple soup, but real. They looked at each other, eyes shining with that almost teary gleam. Are we home? And there it was, the village, as humble as ever, but now glowing with a warmth it never seemed to have before. Funny how the world doesn't change. We're the ones who come back different. When their father opened the door, everything suddenly made sense. He didn't ask, "Where were you?" but instead, "Are you okay?" And that meant more than any explanation. They hugged him tight, one of those hugs that fixes things words never could. They ate simple soup like it was a feast, and laughed like they were pouring life back into the house. The poverty was still there, but the loneliness had gone, and that changes everything. Hansel got his playful spark back, Gretel her confidence, and their father his hope. The house was still small, but now it overflowed with safety, warmth, and a feeling of this is what a real home feels like. Time passed, and peace returned to that family in the shape of quiet routine. They learned that life doesn't always offer easy choices, but it always offers chances to begin again. And as that story came to an end, another quietly began to stir in the forest. Not far from there, a girl in a red hood walked with a basket in hand, unaware that fate was about to whisper her name. Little Red Riding Hood. The morning in the village seemed to have woken up in a good mood, spreading warm sunlight across the windows like it was saying, "Come on, today's going to be gentle." The flowers woke up before the people, coloring the path with the kind of flair only nature knows how to pull off. The smell of fresh bread mixed with birdsong, and even the wind seemed to be singing. That's how soft it was. And right in the middle of all this calm, there she was, a girl in a bright red hood, drawing attention without even trying. She wasn't in a rush. She walked like someone who knows how to enjoy every little piece of the journey, kicking pebbles and picking flowers just because she felt like it. In her hands, a warm basket filled with food lovingly prepared by a mother, and just a touch of "don't forget your coat," even though the sun was out. The village adored her, because she had that rare kind of presence that lights up a place just by being there. She wasn't loud, but she made the day feel brighter. And the most curious thing, she seemed completely at ease, even in the forest where many were too afraid to set foot. Maybe because innocence, when it meets courage, becomes a special kind of strength. And on that day, while the world smiled all around her, she had no idea her story was about to take a turn. But it's always like that. The most unforgettable chapters of life sneak in quietly, right along the path lined with flowers. Her mother was the kind of person who loved with firmness, not the dramatic kind, but the one who speaks truths in a soft voice and with one raised eyebrow. Before letting her go, she adjusted the red hood, checked the basket 3 times, and gave her the classic warning, "Go straight to Grandma's house, and don't talk to strangers." Little Red Riding Hood nodded with a "got it" smile, but with a sparkle in her eyes that said, "Maybe I'll take a little detour." She wasn't rebellious, just curious, and curiosity in a child is basically nature's law. Her mother insisted, The forest is beautiful, but it's full of shortcuts that look easy and end up far from home. It was advice wrapped in love and experience, the kind you only really understand after you've made a mistake once. Red Riding Hood listened carefully, but deep down she believed the world was more kind than dangerous, and honestly, it's hard to blame someone for having faith in life. The basket felt comfortably heavy in her hands, the scent of cake escaped through the cloth, and the path ahead called to her like an invitation. Her mother kissed her forehead, the kind of kiss that protects more than any armor, and she set off, light, happy, her steps almost dancing, as if the forest were a stage, and the day a rehearsal for an unforgettable story. Her mother's advice still echoed in her mind, but so did the pull of freedom. And sometimes, between do the right thing and just a peek, the best adventures are born. The forest entrance was so beautiful, it almost felt like a trap, light dancing between leaves, the scent of pine mixed with damp earth, and a stream humming softly beside the trail. Red Riding Hood walked slowly, savoring every detail like someone flipping through a picture book. The ground was soft with moss, and the tall trees cast shadows just right, not too dark, not too bright. She felt the wind brush her cheeks, as if the forest had recognized her and whispered, "Welcome." From time to time, she crouched to pick a colorful flower or followed butterflies like they were tour guides. Everything felt so peaceful that it was easy to forget the world also has hidden corners. But sometimes the forest made strange sounds, a twig snapping, leaves rustling with no wind, and her heart would beat just a little faster. Nothing terrifying, just a soft reminder that beauty and mystery live in the same place. Still, she kept walking, confident, because inside her was a quiet kind of bravery, even if she didn't know it yet. The basket swung gently on her arm, comforting, as if saying, "I've got you." And the trail. The trail stretched out ahead of her, like it was just as curious to see how far this little girl would go. She had no idea that, right there among the trees, someone else was curious too, but for very different reasons. That's when he appeared, not with a roar or bared teeth, but with a smile far too polite to be casual. The wolf had that sharp way about him, someone who's better at talking than hunting, and that already said a lot. "Good morning, young lady," he said, tilting his head like a well-trained gentleman. Red Riding Hood, raised with good manners, answered kindly, but kept a certain caution in her eyes. He didn't seem dangerous, he seemed curious, and curiosity is always harder to refuse than threat. "Where are you off to so early, with such a delicious-smelling basket?" asked the wolf, feigning disinterest while his nose worked overtime. She hesitated, remembering her mother's advice, but it was just a question, right? Just conversation, and conversation doesn't hurt. "I'm going to visit my grandmother," she replied. "Simple, no drama." The wolf smiled with his eyes, and that's never a good sign. "Why not take a prettier path, one full of flowers and amazing views," he offered, like someone sharing a secret. She thought, prettier always sounds better than safer, and sometimes danger doesn't arrive shouting, but it shows up offering shortcuts. Red Riding Hood hesitated for a moment, glancing at the straight, safe road like someone looking at a bland dish, then at the flowery shortcut like it was dessert before lunch. The wolf pointed with his paw, that is, with elegance, and described the route like a forest tour guide. She tried to be sensible, but the truth was the forest looked much more enchanting on the side he pointed to. "Just for a bit," she thought. "No one will notice if I'm a few minutes late." And off she went, collecting flowers, listening to the stream, spinning gently like someone dancing with the wind. Meanwhile, the wolf watched with strategic calm, like an audience member who already knew how the play would end. He waited until she was distracted, and with steps far too light for such a big animal, he slipped away between the trees. Red kept walking, happy, peaceful, until she realized the pretty path was also the longest. The sun had shifted in the sky when she finally stopped and said aloud, "Oops." She wasn't lost, but she definitely wasn't on track, and it's funny. That's when she finally understood her mother's warning, not as a strict rule, but as care. Only now, well, now she'd have to trust her own wits to get back, because sometimes growing up begins when "I know what I'm doing" runs headfirst into reality. While Red Riding Hood wandered the scenic trail, the wolf was already several steps ahead. Literally. He knew every shortcut in the forest like he'd memorized the pages of an old book. So he reached Grandma's house long before Red, without breaking a sweat. He knocked at the door with a sweet voice, perfectly mimicking the girl's tone, which is honestly disturbing if you think about it. Grandma, fragile and sniffling with a cold, didn't find it odd. After all, grandmotherly love doesn't come with a safety manual. And the wolf, with all the gentleness of a professional con artist, came in and handled everything his way. But don't worry, no graphic violence here. Let's just say Grandma was tucked away safely, probably locked in a cozy room somewhere. Then, the wolf slipped into her nightgown, put on the cap, adjusted the glasses, and lay down in bed like he was the most convincing creature on the planet. Honestly, he put so much effort into that cosplay. He deserved at least a nomination for Best Performance in a Fairy Tale. The house, smelling of hot tea and soft blankets, fell into the kind of silence that feels like it's waiting for something to happen. And outside, Red Riding Hood was finally making her way back to the right path, thinking the worst part of her day was being late. She had no idea that her grandmother was now unrecognizable and not in a natural way. But don't worry, this girl's got more courage than she knows. When little Red Riding Hood finally arrived at her grandmother's house, the sun was already dipping, and the golden light shining from the windows made everything feel like a hug. She knocked gently, but the voice that answered from inside sounded off, too hoarse, too slow. Still, she stepped inside, because sometimes trust speaks louder than instinct. Grandma was lying in bed, covered all the way up to her nose, hood pulled low and glasses nearly slipping off. Strange. But hey, maybe age changes your sense of style. Red approached slowly, asking all the classic questions. What big eyes you have. What big ears you have. What big mouth you have. And the wolf, clearly enjoying the role like he was on stage, answered each one with such absurd logic, it almost made sense. The tension built, stretched tight like a rubber band, until snap. The disguise fell apart. The wolf pounced. Red took 2 steps back, her heart pounding faster than any drum. But instead of freezing, she thought fast, because fear doesn't erase intelligence, it reveals it. She started screaming for help. Every ounce of air in her lungs turned into noise. The wolf, surprised to be dealing with a girl who fought back, hesitated. And in that tiny pause, a new character entered the scene. The door flew open. Not a violent hero, but a sharp-eyed hunter who sized up the situation in seconds. And with calm, strategy, and a steady hand, he solved the problem. No need to turn Grandma's house into an action movie. The chaos passed like a quick storm, and soon the house smelled like hot tea and calm again. Grandma was freed, a bit rumpled, but alive and grumbling, just like a healthy grandmother should. Red got one of those hugs that fixes every kind of fright, and the hunter simply said, "Next time, trust your instinct more than someone else's smile." No one gave her a harsh scolding, because growing up isn't about never messing up. It's about learning and coming home wiser than you left. Red apologized to her mother later, and the mother, instead of scolding, just said, "Now you understand why I worry." and she did. Truly, the forest was still beautiful, the world still full of dangerous shortcuts. But now she knew how to balance curiosity with caution. She still wore her red hood with pride, because innocence doesn't need to be thrown away. It just needs to walk hand in hand with discernment. That evening, as the soup warmed and the fireplace crackled, everything felt peaceful again. But stories have a funny habit. They love to be born from one another. And somewhere in that very kingdom, as night settled in quietly, a tall hidden tower kept a girl whose hair was so long, the wind wrapped around it like a ribbon, because some adventures happen down on the ground and others begin way up high. Rapunzel. There was a kingdom so far away, it seemed to exist somewhere between a sigh and a dream, the kind of place you're never sure is memory or imagination. Mornings arrived slowly, with mist dancing over rooftops and the scent of sweet flowers carried through the streets on the wind. The people lived at an unhurried pace, like they knew rushing ruins the poetry of the day. The castle shone atop the hill, reflecting sunlight like an elegant lighthouse, watching everything with a quiet grace. And even with all its near-perfect beauty, there were corners of the kingdom wrapped in mystery, hidden gardens, ancient walls, windows that looked like they had secrets to tell. It was the kind of place where every stone had a story, every path hid a legend, and every silence felt full of meaning. People spoke of magic as casually as they spoke of the weather. It might rain today. Yesterday I saw a fairy, totally normal. And among all the tales whispered beside fireplaces, there was one that everyone knew, but no one was quite sure if it was real. A story about a forbidden garden, an old promise, and a girl with hair as golden as the sun. Because in that kingdom, some truths were born as whispers and grew into destiny. And it was exactly in that delicate balance between beauty and mystery that the heart of this story began to beat, slowly, like someone preparing for something big and unforgettable. There was a garden in the kingdom that no one dared to cross, not because it was dangerous, but because it was too special. Surrounded by a tall wall covered in ivy, it seemed to hide a corner of the world where time went off duty. A different kind of scent drifted from it, sweet, fresh, almost hypnotic, as if nature herself had tucked away a secret inside. They said rare plants grew in that soil, with colors found nowhere else, and leaves that shimmered as if lit from within. Some swore they'd seen mist dancing among the flowers at night, as if the garden breathed magic. A couple who lived next to that wall saw the garden every day from their window, and every time they passed by, they felt a curiosity so deep it almost ached. They weren't greedy, they just wanted something beautiful to brighten a simple life. But some desires grow slowly and silently, like vines no one notices until the whole wall is covered. One day, the woman saw a plant swaying just beyond the wall, so beautiful it tugged at her heart like hunger. Not hunger for food, but for meaning. And when desire grows stronger than fear, that's when the story begins to change, even if we don't realize it yet. The husband, seeing his wife weaken from longing for that plant, knew this wasn't just a craving anymore. It was almost a spell. And like someone who does something foolish out of love, he decided to climb the wall at night, thinking he'd take just a handful and no one would notice. But the garden was no ordinary place, and its owner, even less so. A mysterious woman appeared from the shadows before he even touched the ground, eyes steady, voice calm. She didn't scream or threaten. She simply smiled, the kind of smile that's more frightening than anger, and said, "You took something of mine, so now I'll take something of yours." The man tried to explain about his sick wife, the need, the beauty. But promises made under moonlight carry their own kind of power. The woman, whom everyone called the witch, made him a deal. He could take whatever he wanted, but in return, the couple's first child would be hers. Desperation leaves no room for logic, and he said yes, without knowing the true weight of that yes. Months later, a beautiful girl was born, with hair that looked like it was woven from sunlight. When they saw her, the parents understood what it meant to have something too precious to bargain with. But a promise is a promise, and the moment the baby took her first breath of morning air, the witch came to claim her. She named her Rapunzel, after the flower that had awakened desire, and from that moment, destiny began to braid light and loneliness into the same thread. The witch took Rapunzel to a tower so tall the clouds felt like neighbors. There were no doors, only a small window high above, where the wind would sneak in to keep her company. Inside, time moved slowly, as if reluctant to leave. Rapunzel grew up surrounded by books, birdsong, and a constant feeling that the world outside was bigger than her little room. The tower wasn't sad, it was even beautiful in its own way, with soft curtains, the scent of dried flowers, and shy sunlight in the mornings. But no beauty can make up for the absence of choice. The witch visited daily, bringing fruits, fabrics, and made-up stories to fill the silence. And always called the same way, with a deep voice and old habit, "Rapunzel, let down your hair." Golden strands would fall like a living rope, and up the woman would climb, calm, unbothered, as if imprisoning someone with kindness made it acceptable. Rapunzel never complained, but her heart was full of questions. She didn't know the world, but somehow she missed it all the same. And maybe that's the first sign of freedom, when the body is still confined but the mind has already learned how to escape. Rapunzel's days were all the same, but in a beautiful, melancholic kind of way. She woke with sunlight brushing her face and began each day singing, because singing was the only way she knew to speak to the world. Her voice rose and fell over the hills, slipping through trees and streams like a tiny current of light. Whoever passed nearby stopped. Even the wind seemed to listen. And one day, between birdsong and the rustling of leaves, a young prince heard her singing and was completely enchanted. He didn't see her face, only her voice, which sounded like it was made of both longing and hope. He came back the next day and the next, hiding, trying to understand where that melody was coming from, a melody that seemed to heal every sorrow. And when he finally saw the tower, he understood that music came from a place high, lonely, and wrapped in silence. He stayed there until sunset, watching the witch arrive and call out, "Rapunzel, let down your hair." The golden strands poured down like a waterfall of light, and the prince watched in awe as the woman climbed them, like it was the most natural thing in the world. That night, heart pounding, he decided to try. He called out, using the same words, with a firm voice and youthful courage. And when the hair came down again, fate came with it. When Rapunzel pulled up the braids and the prince appeared at the window, she was so startled it felt like the air itself froze. She had never seen another face besides the witch's, and suddenly there was someone with curious eyes, a shy smile, and a voice that didn't want to scare her. "I heard you singing," he said, as if confessing a secret. And that's when something changed. They started talking, cautiously at first, then with the kind of ease that only comes after a very long silence. The prince spoke of the world beyond. Busy streets, loud markets, the smell of fresh bread and rain tapping on rooftops. Rapunzel listened with the sparkle of someone discovering that the impossible also has geography. And the more he spoke, the smaller the room seemed. Too small to hold the new feeling being born. They laughed at simple things, his wind-tousled hair, her fear he might not come back. And when he promised to return, she believed him. Because sometimes, We recognize the truth not by what's said, but by the peace it brings. After he left, the tower looked the same, but now it was filled with invisible windows. And outside, the world kept spinning, but inside someone was already dreaming of catching up to it. For a while, their meetings were a secret kept not under lock, but under braids. The prince came at dusk, bringing little tokens from the outside, a new flower, a fresh story, a shared laugh. Rapunzel kept them all like someone collecting proof that miracles really do exist. But no matter how sweet, secrets always leave trails. The witch began to notice. Rapunzel's eyes sparkled differently. Her songs were happier, her heart beating to a rhythm that wasn't loneliness. And one day, she arrived early, unannounced. Rapunzel, distracted, called out, "You can come up." And fate came up too. When the truth revealed itself, the silence inside the tower was heavier than walls. The witch was furious, not with ordinary anger, but with the fear of losing control. And in her rage, she took Rapunzel far away, to a distant desert, where the wind brought no visitors and carried no hope. But love, when it's real, doesn't break with distance. It just learns how to wait. And there, under the sun and surrounded by silence, Rapunzel began to discover something the witch never understood. Freedom lives inside, and no one can take that from you. Time passed like desert wind, slow on the outside, but fast on the inside. And the more he spoke, the smaller the room seemed. Too small to hold the new feeling being born. They laughed at simple things, his wind-tousled hair, her fear he might not come back. And when he promised to return, she believed him. Because sometimes we recognize the truth not by what's said, but by the peace it brings. After he left, the tower looked the same, but now it was filled with invisible windows. And outside, the world kept spinning, but inside someone was already dreaming of catching up to it. For a while, their meetings were a secret kept not under lock, but under braids. The prince came at dusk, bringing little tokens from the outside, a new flower, a fresh story, a shared laugh. Rapunzel kept them all like someone collecting proof that miracles really do exist. But no matter how sweet, secrets always leave trails. The witch began to notice. Rapunzel's eyes sparkled differently. Her songs were happier, her heart beating to a rhythm that wasn't loneliness. And one day, she arrived early, unannounced. Rapunzel, distracted, called out, "You can come up." And fate came up too. When the truth revealed itself, the silence inside the tower was heavier than walls. The witch was furious, not with ordinary anger, but with the fear of losing control. And in her rage, she took Rapunzel far away, to a distant desert, where the wind brought no visitors and carried no hope. But love, when it's real, doesn't break with distance. It just learns how to wait. And there, under the sun and surrounded by silence, Rapunzel began to discover something the witch never understood. Freedom lives inside, and no one can take that from you. Time passed like desert wind, slow on the outside, but fast on the inside. Rapunzel learned to survive with what she had, her voice, her courage, and the memory of someone who believed in her. The prince, in turn, searched everywhere, stumbling through rumors and clinging to hope until fate got tired of playing hide and seek. It was the sound of her voice that finally guided him, that same song that had first enchanted him. And when he found her, there were no towers, no walls, no fear, just two people who had crossed the impossible to recognize each other again. The hug was simple, but so strong it felt like it stitched time back together. They didn't need promises. Just a look was enough to say the captivity is over. They returned together slowly, because freedom moves at a different rhythm. And when the kingdom saw them return, It was as if the whole story finally let out a relieved breath. Rapunzel cut her hair, not out of anger, but to remind herself that strength doesn't live in strands. It lives in those who learn how to rise again. That night, the stars seemed to shine brighter, as if the sky was quietly applauding their happy ending. But far from there, in another castle, a woman looked at her reflection and saw something that made her tremble. Envy. Snow White. She was born in winter, a winter so beautiful, it seemed the cold had forgotten how to be cruel. Inside the castle, the queen sat sewing by the window, watching the snow fall like the sky unraveling threads of cotton. Each flake landed on the frame like a miniature silence. In that moment of calm and white stillness, she made a wish, simple but powerful. To have a daughter with skin as white as snow, lips as red as the blood that stained the fabric, and hair as black as the ebony window frame. Wishes made on snowy days have a strange kind of sincerity, and sometimes the universe takes them literally. Months later, the girl was born, and everyone in the castle said she was the most beautiful baby ever seen. The queen smiled, tired, but with the quiet peace only mothers recognize. They named her Snow White, a name that sounded more like a dream than a person. But stories always carry a touch of quiet irony. The same winter that brought beauty also took the mother too soon. And so the castle echoed with fewer laughs and more silence. The king, heartbroken, remarried. Winter passed, but left its mark. And there she was, the girl, growing up among mirrors, thrones, and a kind of love that slowly started to be measured by comparison. Snow White grew up surrounded by luxury, but without the kind of affection that actually warms you. She was kind, curious, with that rare gift of seeing beauty in small things. The sound of birds, the smell of flowers, the glow of a morning after snowfall. Meanwhile, the new queen looked at herself in the mirror with a frequency that bordered on sacred ritual, searching each reflection for confirmation that she was still the most beautiful in the land. At first, it was vanity dressed as routine. Then, it became need. And mirrors are like people. The more you ask, the more honest they become. One morning, it finally answered the one thing no one ever wants to hear. There was someone more beautiful than her. The words Snow White echoed through the room like a glass spell breaking. The queen's eyes changed, and the air around her turned cold. Envy is strange. It sneaks in quietly, disguises itself as concern, and by the time you notice, it's already living there. She began watching the girl with a kind of false tenderness, the kind of care that weighs heavy. Snow White, not understanding, kept trying to please her, thinking love could be earned with sweetness. But the queen's heart, now split between pride and fear, saw only one thing in the mirror, a threat with the face of a girl. The castle became too small for two beauties, and the queen noticed it before anyone dared to say it out loud. She decided that Snow White should go for a walk with a huntsman, far, far away, far enough not to come back. But the girl, even without quite understanding the reason for such sudden kindness, felt her heart tighten. There are silences that speak louder than words. The huntsman, a simple man, knew the look of purity and the look of evil, and when they reached the middle of the forest, he followed what his heart told him. He disobeyed. Run, girl, and never look back. She didn't ask why. She just ran, stumbling over roots, leaves, and that damp air that smelled like fear and freedom. The forest was alive. The branches moved like arms. The wind whispered ancient stories, and every step was watched by invisible but kind eyes. When exhaustion overcame fear, she collapsed in a field covered with soft moss, breathing deeply for the first time in hours. The sound of birds returned, Sunlight filtered through the treetops, and the forest seemed to say, "You're safe for now." There, surrounded by nature, Snow White understood something simple and powerful. Sometimes it's exile that teaches the true meaning of home. After wandering for hours, Snow White found a narrow path, almost hidden among the trees. She followed her instincts and the smell of sweet smoke, until she reached a tiny cottage with round windows and a chimney puffing smoke as if it were sighing. Everything there was small and lovely, as if the world had shrunk to fit inside a hug. She knocked on the door, no answer, and stepped in carefully. The house was a charming mess. 7 little plates on the table, 7 little chairs out of place, and a soup smell that seemed frozen in time. Snow White laughed to herself, that nervous, relieved laugh that escapes when fear finally eases up. She cleaned, tidied, put everything in its place, and when she finished, the whole home felt brand new, as if it had been waiting just for her. When the owners arrived, the shock was mutual. 7 dwarfs with round eyes and beards full of stories. They weren't used to visitors, let alone princesses napping in their beds. But all it took was a conversation, and fear turned into friendship. Because kindness is a universal language, in no time she was cooking, singing, and filling the place with the scent of new life. And there, in the middle of the forest, surrounded by small joys, Snow White found what the castle never gave her: true peace. But too much peace tends to bother those who live off control. The Queen, thinking the problem had been solved, asked the mirror once again, and it, always faithful to the truth, answered bluntly, "There is still someone more beautiful than your majesty." That phrase was like a shard of ice piercing her heart. Fury came masked as elegance, and envy returned with more creativity. She dressed up as a fragile old lady, hunched her body, and disguised her voice until she looked like a walking tale. In her hands, she carried an apple so red it looked like it had been mistakenly painted, beautiful enough to hide the danger. She crossed the forest with slow steps and sharp eyes, guided by the instinct of one who knows how to sniff out innocence. Snow White welcomed her with kindness, suspecting nothing. "Take it, my dear, it's just an apple to sweeten your day," said the old woman, her voice too gentle. The girl hesitated, but trust still lived in her, and trust done when it bears no scars is easy to deceive. She took a bite. The silence that followed was heavy, beautiful and tragic, like the moment just before a star falls, and the forest, which had seen many things, fell mute with sorrow. But too much peace tends to bother those who live off control. The Queen, convinced that Snow White had vanished from the world, continued her daily ritual before the mirror. That sickly dialogue that was no longer vanity, but addiction. Mirror, mirror on the wall. She began in a routine tone, expecting to hear the praise that fed her ego. But the mirror, faithful and merciless, replied, "There is still someone more beautiful than your majesty, living among the woods, surrounded by 7 small and kind hearts." It was as if the entire castle had frozen. Hatred grew so fast it seemed to take shape, and if you looked closely, you might have seen the reflection of madness in her eyes. Determined to end both the mirror and the echo of her humiliation, she ordered the forest paths to be tracked. She spoke to hunters, travelers, even bribed lumberjacks who dined in taverns, and every story led to the same point. A young woman with fair skin and a sweet laugh lived hidden in a cabin near the Blue Mountain. That was enough. The Queen sewed the disguise with her own hands, torn clothes, a fake hunch, hair covered by a veil. She turned into a little old lady who inspired pity, not suspicion. And before leaving, she prepared her final blow with precision, an apple, half enchanted, half ordinary, so the poison wouldn't be noticed at first glance. She headed into the forest alone, leaving behind a trail of scorched leaves, as if nature itself tried to warn, trouble is coming. When she finally saw the house, she peeked through the window and saw Snow White laughing, singing, too alive to be endured, and that was the moment envy turned into a plan. She knocked on the door, smiled toothlessly, and spoke with the poisoned sweetness of someone who's rehearsed a lie. "Take it, my dear. It's just an apple to sweeten your day." Snow White hesitated for a moment, with that sixth sense that whispers, something's wrong. But the kindness inside her spoke louder, as it often does in good hearts. The apple was beautiful, too red to be real, and its sweet aroma seemed to promise rest, not danger. She took a tiny bite, and time froze. The fruit slipped from her hand, rolling slowly across the floor, while her eyes closed as if gently lulled to sleep. The old woman smiled, that smile that blends triumph with emptiness, and vanished into the woods before the wind could tell on her. When the dwarfs returned, they found the girl fallen, serene, as if merely asleep after a long day. They tried to wake her, called her name, asked the forest for help, but even the birds had gone silent. So they did what simple hearts do when there's nothing else to be done. They cared. They built a glass coffin so the world could see how beauty can be tragic and purity fragile. They placed flowers around it, promised an eternal vigil, and waited. Because deep down, everyone knew. Stories that begin with snow never end in silence. And even in sadness, the forest seemed to hold a secret. Life always finds a way to wake up what is true. Time passed unhurriedly, and the forest grew used to the quiet presence of that girl sleeping among flowers. The seasons changed, leaves fell and returned, and still the dwarfs kept the same ritual, cleaning the glass, changing the flowers, talking to her as if it were only a matter of time before she opened her eyes. One day, a traveler appeared, and a prince, the kind who carries more curiosity than crown. He saw the light glinting through the glass and thought it was a trick of the sun. But as he drew closer, the world seemed to pause. There was something in Snow White's peacefulness that disarmed any sadness. He asked the dwarfs what had happened, listened to the story, and stayed, with no desire to leave. He visited every day, like someone clinging to the impossible. And on one of those visits, while trying to adjust the coffin to take it somewhere more fitting, he stumbled. The piece of apple lodged in the girl's throat shifted, and the spell broke, so quietly it took a few seconds to notice. Her eyes opened slowly, like someone waking from a dream that had gone on far too long. The first face she saw was his, surprised, startled, moved, and for a moment, the world seemed to breathe along with them. No kiss, no extravagant magic, just fate, tired of waiting for the right moment. Waking up felt like being born again inside her own body, strange and beautiful at once. Snow White looked around and saw tears on the faces of her small friends, relief shining in the prince's eyes, and the open sky, as if even time had been touched. She didn't understand right away what had happened, but she grasped what mattered most. She was alive and surrounded by genuine love. The prince gently reached out his hand, not as a savior, but as someone inviting her forward. She accepted, and together they returned to the kingdom, now more light than shadow. The news spread, and even the queen's mirror shattered for good, perhaps out of shame, perhaps relieved to never have to lie again. The castle, once cold, filled with laughter once more, and the forest, which had always known too much, kept the secret of the miracle. Snow White learned that beauty is not what the mirror shows, it's what survives when it breaks. And there, between forgiveness and a new beginning, she found a rare kind of peace. But the world of stories never rests. And while one kingdom celebrated the return of a princess, elsewhere, a young girl covered in ashes stared out her window, dreaming of a ball and a chance to change her life. Because every light sparks another. and it was time for a new flame to start shining. Cinderella. In that house that looked so ordinary, among buckets, brooms, and the smell of soap, lived a young woman who seemed made of disguised light. They called her Cinderella, a nickname that began as a joke, but ended up becoming poetry. She took care of everything: the fire in the hearth, her stepsister's clothes, her stepmother's breakfast, and even the lazy cat that pretended to help. She was the kind of person who, even when exhausted, found a way to smile. Not because everything was fine, but because she knew complaining wouldn't make time pass any faster. The ashes from the fireplace clung to her hands, but they also told stories. In them, Cinderella saw drawings, castles, maybe even a future she hadn't yet dared to dream of. While scrubbing the floor, she listened to the distant songs of birds and imagined what it would be like to live in a place where no one gave her orders. She didn't dream of wealth, just of kindness. And even surrounded by people who mocked her, she never learned how to return cruelty. She had that stubborn sweetness of someone who believes the world can be good, even when the world does everything it can to prove otherwise. The sisters, vain and loud, laughed at her daydreams, and the stepmother pretended not to see. But beneath the dust and ashes, there was something no one could erase. A quiet hope, almost invisible, but alive. And sometimes it's exactly that kind of hope that magic loves to visit. One morning, as the sun stretched lazily through the windows, a piece of news reached the village that felt like it had stepped out of a fairy tale. The king would host a grand ball in honor of the prince, who had returned from his travels. All the young women in the kingdom were invited, and that one sentence was enough to change the temperature of the house. The sisters ran like sparks, shouting orders, choosing dresses, fighting over mirrors. Cinderella, in the corner, pretended to be busy with her broom, but inside, her heart beat in sync with the excited voices. She didn't say it aloud, but she dreamed of going, not out of ambition, but from curiosity, to see what the world was like beyond the walls that held her in. As she hemmed the sisters' dresses, she imagined what it would be like to dance without fear of being sent back to chores. The stepmother, noticing the light in her eyes, quickly moved to extinguish it. "You, at a royal ball," she scoffed, with that kind of laugh that wounds without needing words. Cinderella replied with the elegant silence of someone who's learned that dignity is a form of resistance. At night, while everyone else slept, she stared into the hearth's flame, letting her thoughts run free. She wasn't asking for the impossible, just a night where she could be seen as she truly was, not as others treated her. And maybe the universe heard her wish, because at that very moment, a soft breeze slipped through the window, as if to say, "Wait a little, something good is coming." The clock marked nearly midnight of solitude when suddenly a gentle light began to spread through the kitchen. It wasn't fire, nor candlelight. It was different, more alive, as if the air itself had decided to glow. Cinderella looked around, startled, until she saw a woman with kind eyes and a mischievous smile, holding a wand that seemed made of moonlight. "Why that sad little face, my dear?" asked the voice while sounding like an old melody. Cinderella, not quite believing what she was seeing, explained through nervous laughter that she wanted to go to the ball, but had no dress, no carriage, and no time. The woman smiled the way people with power smile before they change the world. "Oh, that's easy. We just need a little faith and a pumpkin." The rest was pure enchantment, a wave of the wand, and the pumpkin became a golden carriage, the mice, elegant horses, the old dress, an outfit that looked like it was made of stars. Cinderella looked at herself and, for a moment, thought she was dreaming. But the fairy godmother winked, sweet and serious. "The magic lasts until midnight. After that, everything goes back to what it was, except you, because you will have changed." And so, with her heart beating louder than the horse's hooves, Cinderella left to live the night that destiny had owed her for far too long. The castle looked like a living painting that night. The windows sparkled, chandeliers hung from the ceiling like bunches of stars, and the music filled the air with a lightness that made time slow down. Cinderella arrived a little unsure, afraid that everyone would realize she didn't belong in that world, but all it took was one step into the ballroom for the murmurs to stop. Every eye turned to her, and the sound of the orchestra seemed to shift. It wasn't just the dress or her beauty, it was the way she looked around, as if grateful to simply be there, not thinking she deserved more than anyone else. The prince, used to rehearsed smiles, noticed the difference right away. He walked toward her, offering his hand with an almost shy simplicity. "May I?" he asked, and she nodded, laughing nervously. As they began to dance, everything else faded: the ballroom, the royalty, the stairs. They seemed like two ordinary people, dancing as if the world were kind for a few precious minutes. Between one song and the next, they talked about little things: the smell of autumn, the taste of the castle's honey cake, the joy of dancing barefoot. And maybe it was there, in the middle of all that formality, that the prince realized what true beauty is, the kind that doesn't need an introduction. The night felt endless, the kind you wish would never end. But time, with its sharp sense of humor, began to speed up when the clock struck the first chime of midnight. Cinderella froze, remembering the fairy's words. After this, everything goes back to what it was. The prince tried to understand her sudden panic, but she only shook her head, with no time to explain. She ran out of the ballroom, her dress sparkling as if the stars themselves were trying to hold her back. She rushed down the grand staircase, the 12 chimes marking the rhythm of her escape. One of her glass slippers slipped from her foot and stayed behind, shining on the step like a secret left on purpose. She didn't stop. She ran to the carriage, which barely held together under the final breath of magic. The horses turned back into mice, the coachman into a lizard, and the pumpkin, well, a pumpkin again. Cinderella arrived home breathless, her heart still dancing, and laughed to herself, part disbelief, part joy. In the cracked kitchen mirror, she saw a sweaty face and the smile of someone who had lived something no one would ever believe. And without knowing it, she had left behind not just a slipper, but a clue for destiny to keep the story going. The next morning, the entire castle seemed to wake up in the mood for a romantic chase. The prince, holding the glass slipper in his hands, swore he would find the one who fit it, not out of whim, but because he had felt something words couldn't explain. He sent messengers to every village, asking every young woman to try on the shoe. The kingdom turned into an impromptu parade of nervous feet and hopeful smiles. Meanwhile, Cinderella heard the rumors from afar, scrubbing the floors and pretending it didn't hurt to hear about a love that felt like just a dream. Her stepsisters, full of excitement, got ready as if preparing for a miracle. The messenger arrived at their house, and the tiny crystal slipper went from foot to foot, fitting none. When the stepmother tried to dismiss Cinderella with a "No need, she's just the servant," the prince, and who insisted on being present, stepped in. "Every young woman in the kingdom must try," he said firmly, looking at no one but her. Cinderella, blushing and trembling, slipped her foot into the slipper, and it fit as if it had been waiting its whole life for that moment. The silence that followed was the kind that comes right before something beautiful. And the prince, without needing any magical confirmation, simply smiled. Because sometimes, when the heart knows, the rest of the world falls into place. The castle filled with music once more, but this time the melody sounded like it had been written by someone who truly believed in happy endings. Cinderella walked up the stairs, no longer running, in the same simple dress as always, and yet she seemed to shine. The prince welcomed her not with grandeur but with tenderness, like someone reunited with something he was never meant to lose. The ball was held again, not out of protocol but pure, sincere joy. People danced, bells rang, and even the lazy cat back at the old house seemed to meow in approval. The stepmother and stepsisters watched from a distance, part regretful, part confused, unable to understand how someone who lived among ashes could carry so much light. But Cinderella held no grudge, only gratitude for the crooked road that led her there. She had discovered that sometimes it's exactly what tries to diminish you that prepares you to shine. When the prince asked if she wanted to stay, she laughed. "Stay. I just wanted the chance to choose." And he understood, because true love doesn't trap, it invites. That night, the entire castle slept peacefully, the air filled with the scent of flowers and warm bread, as if the whole world had decided to breathe in peace. But far from there, well beyond the glowing fields, a new dawn rose over a quiet village, where old and new stories waited to be told once again, and so among forests, towers, mirrors, and castles, the stories wove themselves together like threads in the same grand tapestry. Hansel and Gretel discovered that courage is a quiet thing. Little Red Riding Hood learned that curiosity must walk hand in hand with caution. Rapunzel understood that freedom begins on the inside. Snow White showed that purity is not weakness, and Cinderella saw that kindness is a strength time can never erase. Each of them, in their own way, walked through fear, loneliness, and the unknown, and came back changed, but whole. What connects them all isn't the magic nor the happy endings. It's the simple act of going on, even when the path seems impossible. Because deep down, that's what every tale is really about. Continuing. The forest changes, the wolves change, the towers change, but the heart that chooses hope always finds a way out. As night falls over the kingdom and the windows go dark one by one, you can almost imagine each character falling asleep in peace, guarding their part of the miracle. Outside, the wind quietly tells these stories to those still awake, mixing the smell of firewood, the sound of crickets, and one last whisper of magic. And if you listen closely, you might realize the stories don't end, they simply rest until someone chooses to dream again. So close your eyes slowly and let the next dream continue the story.